All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jenna Wood, and I am one of the dietitians here with Giant and Martins. Today, if you're new to our classes, welcome, and of course, welcome back to all of our regulars. Today's class is going to be a little different than the living wells you've attended the last 3 weeks when it comes to heart health. Certainly, we're still going to talk about heart health, but in a different fashion. So for our Q&A classes, which we don't host every month, I think the last one I did was back in November. Basically, I take a couple questions that we are asked regularly as dietitians. This one I tried to focus mostly on heart health for February, but then once I answered the questions that were pre-submitted or that we already have, I'm going to get to questions that are in the Q&A. So they don't have to be heart health related. Whatever nutrition topic you're thinking about, do pop those questions into the Q&A, and I'll get to as many as I can before the end of class. So let us dive into our Ask the Dietitian. Come on. There we go. Okay. So, does rinsing canned vegetables and beans, does it really help lower sodium? And the good news is, yes, rinsing really does help, and by a good measure too. So when we're rinsing, and the recommendation for rinsing canned beans and veggies is actually to pour all of the contents that were in that can into a colander and let it drain for 1 to 2 minutes. Like, I know none of us are doing that, but in the studies that they've done to see like how much sodium do we really get off, that was like the baseline they used. So pour it into a colander and then give it a rinse. Lukewarm water. It could be cold, but again, the studies they did were on like lukewarm water, and give it a good rinse. And this can reduce the sodium from about 23 to 40% on average. So it definitely does help. Of course, the recommendation is to also look out for options that we carry at Giant and Martin's that are no salt added or low sodium on the can. We have so many options for those. Look out for guiding stars, the little logo that's on our branded products. So you can save yourself the hassle of having to drain them if you purchase those ahead of time. Now, are there any downsides to rinsing? Well, yeah, I mean, you have to do the process of rinsing, which takes time. But in theory, we do wash away a small amount of water-soluble vitamins. So these are things like vitamin C and some of the B vitamins, especially from like the canned veggies like green beans and things. But the overall nutrition you're getting, all the other vitamins, minerals, fiber, they're still intact. So pros, cons, definitely still worth rinsing it to get off that sodium for sure. So it does really help, especially, the liquid itself would have had a lot of sodium, so you're saving yourself that. Next question. So we get asked this a lot. So I thought it was something to kind of bring up. And I think Shayna touched on trans fats a little in her presentation. But do I still have to look out for trans fats in products? Yes and no. I feel like that's always the answer, right? Like, yeah, a little. So back in, it officially like came out in like 2015, and then by 2018, industry, products were told they had to remove trans fats from their products. So when it comes to heart health, there are of course different types of fats, and trans fats were the type we found were really, really bad for our heart health and overall health. Not only do they increase LDL cholesterol that we don't want, they can also decrease HDL cholesterol, which is kind of the one we want a little bit more of. So double whammy in terms of, cardiac health. So the FDA, stepped in and said, we're going to ban these because they're not great for us. So by, I think the official like ban date was like 2023. So no products you're purchasing that were produced in the United States will have trans fats added to them. So when you're looking at the ingredient list for foods, especially like, foods we want to reduce our intake of anyway. So things like, packaged snacks and baked goods and those types of things. You used to look for the ingredient partially hydrogenated oils. And the partially is the really important word there because you may still see hydrogenated oils in ingredient lists. Those are saturated fats. Still not great for heart health, but nowhere near as bad as trans fats. So that was something you could look out for. Additionally, on the actual nutrition panel, you will still see trans fats listed under total fat. It should always say zero in a product that's made in the United States because, again, we don't allow them. However, there can be some naturally occurring trans fats that are just inherently in some high fat dairy products and some cuts of meat. So in theory, you'll still see some. And there's a loophole. There's a lot of loopholes in food labeling. But in the trans fat world, as long as it's under zero point 0.5 grams of trans fats per serving, yeah, you can put 0 grams because you don't have to do, you can round. So in theory, some of these higher fat dairy products and meats might have like zero point 0.3, but because it's under zero point 0.5, they're able to round down to zero. So this is where portion control is also really helpful because we can fit zero point 0.3 grams in our day. The recommendation was really to reduce to like below 2. But when trans fats were in a lot of processed foods, that was really hard to do. So I wouldn't drastically worry about the, animal products that might have some, but they could in theory be in there. So just something to look out for. But fortunately, they're no longer in added in an ingredient. So that's a good thing. That's a win. All righty. Our next question. So, does coffee or caffeine raise blood pressure? And this is another one where it's like yes and no, right? Nothing is ever just simple. So yes, temporarily, caffeine, whether it's from coffee or other caffeinated products, can cause a short-term rise in blood pressure, typically within about 30 to 60 minutes of consuming that beverage. The bump in blood pressure is often much more noticeable in people who do not drink caffeine regularly. So if you're somebody who has had a cup of coffee every morning for 40 years, you're probably not experiencing a discernible bump in blood pressure from coffee. However, that's to say, we're all very different people and we have different sensitivities to different ingredients. So the way caffeine works is it actually constricts some blood vessels. And that's why it can temporarily bump up our blood pressure. So if you're somebody who is really, really at risk of high blood pressure, or you're somebody who doesn't drink it regularly, you may just want to be more cautious. Maybe, do half calf or something like that. I also do recommend, like, if you're curious, if you're somebody whose blood pressure is affected, you can always check it. Like, do a little science experiment on yourself. This is something when I was thinking through this, I kind of want to do it for myself. Check your blood pressure before you drink your coffee, maybe wait 30 minutes and check it. See, is there a 5, 10, number? It's called millimeters of mercury. Like, did that go up? So again, for most of us, not significantly. And then in the long term, caffeine or coffee intake is actually typically linked to lowered effects of blood pressure. It's not one of the things we recommend for blood pressure, but it typically is not linked to chronic blood pressure problems. Of course, if you've been told by a healthcare provider to watch out for caffeine intake when it comes to heart health or blood pressure, certainly listen to their recommendations. And for all of us, the recommendation still is to keep our caffeine intake as low as possible. The like peak is like 400 milligrams, which is like 4 small cups of coffee. So thinking about like how big your cups of coffee really are. So keep it lower, and large, like single doses of caffeine, like if you were to drink an energy drink that had a lot of caffeine, that could cause adverse heart health effects for a lot of people. So be cautious, but your typical morning cup of coffee, probably not raising your blood pressure chronically and not a huge concern. Okay, I think I have one or two more questions. So, should I worry about the sodium that's naturally found in foods? So, in most cases, no. The sodium that's found in naturally occurring products, things like fruits and vegetables, dairy products like milk, and unpasteurized meats and seafood, yes, they're going to have sodium. Anything for the most part that grows in the ground, eats foods that grow in the ground, or lives in the ocean, which is quite salty, it can have naturally occurring sodium. However, many of these foods are typically still considered low sodium in the quantities we're consuming them. So if you're predominantly eating an, you know, diet that's not full of a lot of processed foods, not something I would worry about the sodium that's coming from these. However, if you really need to monitor your sodium, let's say you're on a 1500 milligram restriction for sodium, it's still something that adds up. So you do want to watch, especially for some of the products that do have at least like 100 milligrams. So it does count, but it's not where the majority of Americans are getting their salt. That's from the processed foods, the deli meats, the cheeses, the breads, those types of foods, pizzas, takeout, that type of stuff, not from, a lot of naturally occurring foods. We do, of course, need sodium in our diet as well. So if you're eating a lot of whole foods that have sodium, you're very likely getting enough. Um, so just something to kind of think about. The only food that I would say has a lot of sodium naturally, and sometimes it's added to it as well, are going to be some types of shellfish. So especially I picked shrimp on purpose for this image. Shrimp will naturally have some sodium. Again, they're living in the ocean. And then once we take them and freeze them so that they're safe for you to consume long term, sometimes sodium or preservatives that have sodium in it will be added because otherwise, we're not eating it right away. The texture can get a little funky because of the water that's lost from the shrimp. So adding a little bit of sodium kind of helps retain that moisture that we like in foods like shrimp and scallops and everything. So just we have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of that, of like, is that the high sodium food you eat for the day? Possibly. We do have, I believe our Nature's Promise line is much lower in sodium than even our regular store brand, and then a lot of other national brands you'll see. So shrimp is the only one I really think of in terms of like a natural product that can be a little high. So just keeping that in mind when it comes to sodium. But I tend to not worry about the sodium in milk and veggies and things like that. It's more those packaged processed foods and takeout. And my final question before I see a bunch of questions. So, this is something I kind of hear and see people talk about once they go on a medication for blood pressure, cholesterol, what have you. But does your diet still matter once you're taking the medications and they've reduced your blood pressure or your cholesterol to quote unquote normal levels? Now, I do feel like a lot of you attending this call, even if you are on these medications, you probably don't believe this. You probably know that our diet still matters. However, you have heard these claims before. So, yes, your diet and lifestyle still matter a lot, even if you are on medications for these conditions. And medication alone might not be enough for some people, and diet alone might not be enough for some people. And that's why I really love that we get to work with our pharmacy team, and especially when we get to lead programs together, because it's not one or the other. For a lot of us, it's both. And that can be totally fine. But we want to make sure we're still, maintaining a healthy lifestyle because lifestyle changes like diet can really work synergistically or work together with those medications. So your diet, reducing your saturated fat, the trans fats, increasing your fiber intake can help with cholesterol and maybe consuming more omega-3s, and then reducing your sodium, potentially eating more potassium-rich foods, may help with your blood pressure. But diet with those medications can really potentially reduce the amount of the medication you need to take. It can improve your control with the medication and also just reduce your cardiovascular risk as a whole when we're doing it together. And of course, eating a balanced, healthy diet is not just good for our heart health, it's good for so many other things. So we do still want to, you know, think about our lifestyle, which again, if you're on this class, you probably already knew. And if you are making those dietary changes and you are making a habit of it, that might be something to have a conversation with your healthcare provider the next time and see, are you getting your blood work done regularly? Maybe you don't need as much of the medication as you once did when you weren't, working on your lifestyle. Not always. Again, sometimes our bodies are just finicky. but sometimes you may be able to reduce your dose. So something to kind of look out for. Okay. These are just our upcoming classes. We do have a lot of great ones, so make sure you tune in for those. But I am going to stop sharing, and I'm actually going to get to the questions that are in our Q&A. So if you have thought of any, please pop them in. We have 15 minutes, so make sure you pop in any questions that you have thought about. Let's see. What are the best packaged protein drinks? That's a good question. Truly, like every other answer, it's going to be, it depends. So, my personal preference on taste, texture, flavors may vary than what you like. And of course, there's going to be vegan, plant-based options, and then typically dairy-based options for like the pre-packaged ones. I tend to really like if I like am on the go and really want, I like adding them my coffee I've not finished, which is bad. I try to keep my caffeine intake before noon so that I can sleep at night. But in my coffee, sometimes if I know I'm low on protein that day, because I don't tend to eat a lot of meat, um, I will sometimes add a protein drink as my creamer. And I do really like some of the Fairlife beverages because instead of having like an added whey protein, they're just a hyper filtered milk product, which is kind of cool. But there's a lot of great brands out there. And I would just look, my biggest recommendation when you are picking a pre-made protein drink is thinking through like why you're using it, how frequently you're using it, and what is in that product. Because some of them, yes, are like just pure protein, which I think is the name of a brand, but is that's all it is. It's like protein and maybe some carbohydrates if it's, like the ultra filtered milks and things. Others might have a ton of like vitamins and minerals and things added to it to be like a meal replacement. But maybe you don't need those vitamins and minerals because they're kind of functioning as like a multivitamin and you might not need that. So sometimes I recommend looking, like if you are already taking a multivitamin, you don't necessarily need all the vitamins that are added to that protein drink. So just be cautious and read your labels, but there's a lot of good ones out there. Okay, let's see. What is your view on artificial sweeteners as related to heart health? And then somebody kind of right next to it asked about history of stevia. I've only heard of it in recent years, but how was it discovered and how did it get so popular? I probably won't be able to dive into all of that, but I'll kind of answer them together. So, in terms of heart health, when it comes to artificial sweeteners, like everything else, it's going to be like a balance. So if you were somebody who consumed a lot of added sugars and consuming artificial sweeteners, maybe in the form of soda or something, or what you used to have an added sugar and now you've switched to using whether it's an artificial sweetener or something like stevia, those are, non-nutritive sweeteners, we call them, that can really improve heart health because you're likely reducing your calorie intake, which can help with a lot of things. You're likely, you're reducing your added sugar, which can, if we're over consuming that, can be not great for our blood sugar. So there's a lot of benefits to reducing added sugars. And for a lot of people, that means maybe relying on some non-nutritive sweeteners for a little bit. Um, of course, we don't want to overdo it with either. So finding ones that you can use the smallest quantity of can be helpful. There are some that it's really hard to research specific ingredients because we don't consume ingredients in a vacuum. We consume them in, other foods and things like that. But there were some studies like a year or two ago about erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol that is found in a lot of artificial sweeteners. Although it's a naturally occurring sweetener, it's found in fruits as well. But when we synthesize it, add it to products, we think of it as like an artificial sweetener. It's a sugar alcohol. That one, there were some studies saying, like, I think people who had heart attacks, they had higher levels of erythritol in their diet or higher levels of erythritol in their blood. However, we can produce erythritol and it can be in our bloodstream, even if you're not consuming it through artificial sweeteners. And it was kind of a chicken and egg situation. Like, was the erythritol high in the blood and that caused heart issues? Or did the heart issues come first and then, erythritol levels then became high. So it wasn't sussed out very well. And a lot of the studies didn't even ask the people if they ate artificial sweeteners like erythritol. So, there was a lot not great about some of the studies that were showing that. But otherwise, in moderation for most people, artificial sweeteners shouldn't have a huge impact on heart health. If not, could be positive if we're decreasing our added sugar intake. And when it comes to stevia, stevia is actually a natural product. You can buy a stevia plant and it kind of looks not like mint, but like that's kind of what the leaves look like. So stevia as a plant has been around for, I mean, I would assume thousands of years. Using it as a sweetener in the way we are now is a newer thing. Actually processing it and turning it into like a powder. But it's definitely not new. I would say of all of the quote unquote natural sweeteners, stevia has been around for a while. I feel like we did have a presentation, and I've talked about stevia in some of our classes. Like I know the one I just did on cranberry juice, I think we talked about stevia a little bit. But I think it became popular because people were looking for low carb, low sugar, no sugar added alternatives that still tasted sweet because as humans, we like sweet things. So I think that's kind of what grew in popularity, but not everyone loves it. Like to me, it can taste quite bitter. It kind of just depends. Great questions though. Let's see. Should you then dry the beans or veggies prior to using? Yes and no. It depends on how you're using them. So if you're throwing those canned beans into a soup or to a chili, I wouldn't bother drying them off. But no, you certainly do not have to dry them off. I feel like a lot of ways you might be using them, you're probably heating them up or doing something. So no, you don't necessarily have to dry them. Um, what else? Are frozen veggies already rinsed? I would say typically, like they're already, ready to consume once you heat them up. You should not be eating frozen veggies uncooked. So it even says that on the package, like you have to cook frozen veggies before you eat them. Like it recommends like cooking it to an internal temperature of, I think, 165. But most frozen vegetables don't have salt added to them because the freezing is actually the preservation process. In canned foods, the canning process, yes, but we add sodium to one for flavor, but also to help keep them preserved. So frozen veggies you shouldn't have to rinse. Um, Good question. So somebody asked, why did we have trans fats added to the start? What purpose did they serve if they're so bad? Wonderful question. So before we knew they were bad, or as bad as they are, trans fats were added for a lot of reasons. One, they were amazing for taste and for mouthfeel and texture, especially in baked goods. Um, and they also helped increase and improve shelf life, which, if you're a company, you want your product to have a long shelf life. And as a consumer, we don't want our foods to go bad quickly either. So that was kind of the main reasons we were using them. It helped products be shelf stable and it helped with taste and mouthfeel, which is good. So that's why they were there. But then, of course, as people consume more and more of them, and we saw, heart issues exponentially increase, that was one of the things they kind of sussed out was a problem. So then, of course, we took them out of products, and a lot of those same companies just replaced it with saturated fats, which are still not great for our heart health in excess. So, still, these products are not something we want to consume in excess of either. Um, but yeah, there's a lot of reasons that certain ingredients, whether it be salt, sugar, or fat, are added to foods, but that was a big reason for trans fats. These are great questions. Um, Okay, this is a good. Is there a difference in caffeine from cold sources like sodas with hot sources like coffee? I get stomach cramps from cold sources, but not hot sources like coffee. That's a really good question. I don't know from a caffeine perspective how much would change from like even if you were to compare like and like, so like an iced coffee or a hot coffee. If we're comparing a product like so I think it was soda with coffee. I mean, there's so many other variables, right? Like soda is also going to have preservatives and phosphates and different things, and those could be an issue for other people, even though you're saying the cold ones don't seem to bother you. Um, there's so many things like hot coffee. So I think I talked about this in a coffee class, was it last month? When we process or we make coffee, especially in a hot method, we are extracting a lot of oils that were in the coffee bean that came out during roasting. And for a lot of people, those oils can cause acid reflux and stomach issues. So that could be a reason why hot coffee, or depending on the method of brewing for coffee, like French press, where we're not filtering the coffee, that can cause a lot more of those compounds to come out and could cause stomach issues. It also depends on how hot the beans were roasted. Like, there's so many variables with that. So I would venture to guess, like the hot coffee, you might have an issue with some of maybe the oils and things that were produced in the coffee. That would maybe be my guess, that the coffee could cause stomach cramps. Additionally, coffee, for a lot of people, I can't remember. Oh goodness, off the top of my head, I can't remember the exact mechanism of action, like how it does it. But coffee, some of it might be caffeine. There's also some other compounds. It makes people go to the bathroom, which some people love that about coffee is they drink their cup of coffee in the morning and it helps them go to the bathroom. So it could be that your body doesn't like that and causes cramping, for myriad of reasons. But that could be another thing is coffee can cause people to go to the bathroom, and that can cause cramping, but like a soda wouldn't. Good question. Let's see. Oh, I like this question. Are breads that are high in fiber a good option for hitting fiber goals, or are they not the right type of fiber to keep you regular? Yes and no. I'm sure you're shocked. So there's so many breads out there. There are going to be breads that are just made with whole grains, and they're going to have inherent, fiber that is from wheat. So it's going to be a combination of soluble and insoluble fiber, which is really great for regularity. So, like actually going to the bathroom on a regular basis, we're looking more typically to that insoluble fiber. So, that's going to be like the roughage and things. So, yes, we will get some of that. But then there's a lot of breads out there nowadays that have added fibers. It could be things like inulin or chicory root or soluble corn fiber. There's like a lot of things added. It'll increase the amount of fiber that's in that food. Uh, but it's typically a soluble fiber, which is great for heart health. Like it can potentially help with reducing our cholesterol levels, but it's not necessarily always going to be the type that keeps you regular. It can help. Um, so yes and no. The best thing when it comes to fiber is really one, going slow when you're increasing the amount that you're consuming and drinking plenty of water and fluids with it. Because if you start to consume a lot of fiber and you're not drinking a lot of water, that can cause constipation because we need that fluid to help everything stay not super hard and all of that. So, yes, breads can definitely be a helpful way to add fiber. Like some breads, you can get like 3 grams of fiber per slice, which if you need like 25 grams of fiber and you're having a sandwich and you get 6 grams from just the bread, that adds up over the day. So certainly, I would say breads can. I would, for many of us, watch out for some of the things that have like 30 grams of fiber added, especially if, it causes gas bloating for you. I would go really slow with those like hyper added ones, but a whole grain, whole wheat bread certainly can be a great way to add some fiber, which can keep you regular. Great question. Okay, let's see. Are rice and beans together still a good protein choice in lieu of meat? This is a really great question. So it's kind of evolved, like our information and what we know about protein. But yes, plant-based sources of protein are still a great protein option, especially if you're someone who chooses to not eat a lot of meat. Or even if you do eat meat, we can still get protein from plants. We used to think that you had to combine things like beans and rice together because they are what we refer to as complementary proteins. This means that rice has this proportion of amino acids, which is what protein is made of, and then beans have a different ratio of amino acids. So together we get more of those essential amino acids that our bodies need. So we're like, oh, you need to eat them together to make it like the amino acids you would get from meat. However, what we've more so learned is that our body kind of pools amino acids so that you don't necessarily have to eat them in the same meal. You kind of want to eat them over the course of the same day, couple days. However, just culturally, historically, we tend to eat a lot of complementary foods together. So it really works out really well with things like rice and beans. So, yes, still a great protein option. There are some plant-based foods that are complete proteins, things like soy and I believe chia. And I know there are others, and I'm just not thinking of them right now. But soy is always like the biggest one that, yes, soy is a complete protein in and of itself. But yeah, rice and beans too. I love it. Oh my goodness. Okay. It is 12:30. I am going to hold on to some of these questions because I love doing these classes. I think they are so fun to see kind of what questions you guys have for our team. And yeah, but there's so many good ones. If for any reason you really want your question answered, please just reply to the emails that we send out because we would be so happy to answer them, even if it's not within class. But I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow because I think tomorrow's Thursday, and we hope to see you for more classes. Thanks. Take care.